Hi, I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'd like to talk about the astrological birth chart of Tiger Woods and how we can better understand these planetary cycles and why they produce the results that we are seeing in the news right now, trying to understand what happened to Tiger Woods. Because everyone feels for him. I mean, here's a guy that was on the top of the world. He was doing incredible, the best golfer in the world, and all of a sudden he had a major fall from grace. How can you see that in the birth chart? I'm going to show you how. I mean, talking about Tiger Woods, he is a household name. He won so many tournaments. And the time frame that we're going to talk about was from 1999 to the year of 2004. He was the top rated golfer in the world. He won award and competition one after the other. And then by 2009, 2010, he had this incredible fall from grace. From so many young boy's idol to disgrace. How does this happen? How can you see that in a chart? So I'm here to show you his chart. Notice that he has Virgo as his ascendant, and Virgo as the ascendant sign makes Mercury the chart ruler. So Mercury as the chart ruler makes him very meticulous. The mental quality is astute, because remember, Virgo is all about analysis, critical thinking, organization, meticulous. The sign Virgo is all about making things perfect, really. And it depends on where Mercury goes as ruler of the ascendant, because Mercury rules Virgo. It goes to his fifth house. The fifth house is the house of talent. Remember, I always talk about the fifth house as being the house of Bhuva Punya, which means good past life credit that's due in this lifetime. And essentially what that probably equates to is talent. So he has amazing talent with what? Planet Mercury. Mercury is the mind, how we process, how we calculate information, and this is what golfing is pretty much about. So if you'll notice his Mercury being in the fifth house, it is in the sign of Capricorn, which Saturn rules Capricorn. So his Mercury is in a sign that is very grounded, real, and works hard. But if you'll notice, Saturn is exactly opposed his Mercury in the 11th house. So Saturn being opposed Mercury gives him the quality to the mind where he can focus. He can shut everything out and concentrate. Mercury-Saturn aspects are all about concentration, focus. And this is what this type of sport took. In order to be really good, you have to have the focus, you have to have the discipline, the focus and discipline of the mind, and that's what Saturn's aspect to Mercury will give. So looking a little bit beyond that, always the third house is the house that deals with talent as well. And the reason why the fifth house is the house of talent, creativity, as they say, is because actually the fifth house is the third house from the third house. So if you count from the third house, 1, 3rd, 4th, 2, fifth house, 3. So the fifth house is the third from the third. So the fifth house gets the meanings of creativity and talent. Being good with your hands is really what the third house is about, because it is relative to the third sign, Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury. So going to his third house, look what's there. Moon, Neptune, and Venus. And the moon is so important in a chart. It's the focus. The moon is the mind. It's intelligence. And notice where his moon is. It's at 28 degrees, 51 minutes, I might say, Scorpio. His moon is in the sign that it's debilitated in. So his moon has some issues and problems. And being almost at the very last degree of a water sign, his moon is Gandanta. Gandanta means the last degrees of water. So it's 28 to 29 degrees Scorpio, Cancer, and Pisces. And it literally means drowning. So many times, if the person doesn't have a literal drowning or close call with drowning, then it means drowning in the sense of figuratively being out of control. So it's like a person that feels like emotionally they're out of control many times. And I might add here that currently transiting Saturn is very early degrees of Sagittarius, but it is backing up into Scorpio where it will be and station right there. Stationing means it's moving and then it stops before it goes direct or retrograde. So it stays there for an unusual amount of time. And Saturn's going to station during the summer months on his natal moon, which will be pretty treacherous. So, and I might add, not to make this political, but there are some other famous people that have their moon exactly the same degree as Tiger Woods. 28 degrees of Scorpio, it's Donald Trump. And that's why I've been saying the summer months are going to be difficult. Saturn is setbacks, delays, problems. And anyone that has any planet there is going to get bombarded by some setbacks and problems. That's just the nature of Saturn. But Saturn is the greatest teacher. So if we can gain and learn from this, it's the best thing that could happen. So Tiger's faced with some heavy changes that he has got to wake up. It's a wake-up call and make some changes in his life. Neptune being next to the moon and Venus. Neptune is like a higher octave of Venus. It's like Venus on steroids, I guess I might say. And so when you have this Venus-Neptune together in the third house, this is incredible talent. This is incredible gifts, talent. Finesse is what I call it. There's a definite essence of finesse with the talent that this man has with the Venus-Neptune in Scorpio with the moon. In the third house of, golfing definitely uses the hands, and the third house rules the hands. It's relative to the sign Gemini, which rules the hands because it's the third sign, third house. So with that, notice what is opposed the moon, Neptune, Venus, Mars. So we have Mars in Taurus in his ninth house, and the ninth house is the house of teachers and the father. So to have Mars, remember his father is the one that truly trained him, the one that really took all of his time to train this incredible talent. He would not have developed in his skills if it weren't for his father. And Mars being in the ninth house of the father is reminiscent of that. But Mars, it is retrograde. And when planets are retrograde, there's quite the reversal in their meaning. And Mars many times can indicate our anger, our need to express how we feel about things, and sometimes anger. When you have Mars retrograde, it represses the sense of being able to express your anger properly. So sometimes people may do other things to somehow get their feelings out that are not always on the up and up or of the best choice of character, because they don't feel like they can express the way they really feel. So Mars being in Taurus, and notice Venus is in Scorpio. What happens here is Mars is in Venus's sign and Venus is in Mars' sign. We call this a parivartana yoga, when you have planets that disposit each other and they go back and forth. It's actually called a mutual reception. So they're in each other's signs. So they play out huge in terms of the houses that they bring in together, which the third house is talent. And Venus, ruler of the ninth house, the ninth house is also the house of luck and fortune. So Venus being in the third, has this fortune of this great talent. And he was guided so specifically through his father, because the ninth house being the father. Now also Venus being in the third house cast its rays through its opposition to the ninth house, and it rules the ninth house. So whenever a planet aspects a house that it rules, it empowers that house for whatever it is good for. The ninth house is luck, fortune, the father, but he was under his father's rule, and he really didn't have any freedom. He had to do everything the way his father told him. Now this was probably good, and this is what caused him to be so successful. But at the same time, there's a lot of pent up, I think, regrets and emotions. And it could even be the fact that his father did pass away early on in his career, that he has some kind of sadness and regrets because of this Mars. Now Mars, remember, for Virgo ascendant, is a first-rate malefic planet. It rules the 8th house. The 8th house is the house that is extraordinarily difficult, and it can deal with problems such as disgrace and humiliation. And Tiger is not distance from that. He has experienced great humiliation, and every time he takes a wrong move, the whole world gets to know about it. There's no escaping the public eye when he makes a mistake. So he's come upon some hard times. And if you will notice, Rahu and Ketu, Rahu is the north node of the moon, Ketu is the south node of the moon. When you look at these, Rahu goes to the 2nd house, Ketu goes to the 8th house. The 8th house deals with disgrace and humiliation, which is a part of his experience in this world, his karma. But then the dispositors of Rahu and Ketu are sort of like the karmic destiny planets. So if you will notice, Ketu being in Aries and Rahu being in Libra, Venus rules Libra, Mars rules Aries. So Venus, Mars become the dispositors of Rahu and Ketu, representing that these are the karmas that he has come to learn through in this lifetime. And I want to say that because his Venus and Mars are the planets that go back and forth by dispositor, he's locked into learning all about what? Mars and Venus is about relationships. And he is being struck with this enormous life experience and lesson through this and through relationships, because it was in 2009 that he went through the most horrific experience of his life with his infidelity and what's blasted all over the news, and his divorce. And ever since then, he has never won a tournament. This is devastating. And you can see in the chart that this is relative to his experience with the Mars, the Venus, and the Rahu and Ketu as the dispositors. He has some hardship to experience. To be on top of the world and to fall to the bottom, this is extreme. So let me explain a few more things about his chart, and then we'll get into why this all happened. Notice his Jupiter is in Pisces in the 7th house. And the 7th house is an angle. This is a Hamsa yoga. Whenever you have a planet in its own sign or exalted in an angular house is either 1, 4, 7, or 10. This becomes one of the Mahapurusha yogas, which that means that when you have a planet aside from the sun and the moon in an angle, these planets create power. And so his Jupiter, which it's called a Hamsa yoga, having Jupiter in the angle in its own sign, gives his Jupiter enormous power. So he's very fortunate, very lucky. And notice his Jupiter is casting a trinal aspect to the planets in his 3rd house, to the moon, to Venus, to Neptune, as well as to Saturn, his Saturn being in Cancer in the 11th house. So essentially, in Vedic astrology, we look at the planet as aspecting the whole sign. We don't look at just the orbs and the degrees, but the tighter the orb, the more powerful. But I must say, he has a grand trine with Jupiter aspecting Saturn in the 11th, and the Jupiter and the moon, Jupiter is aspecting the moon, Neptune and Venus in the 3rd house. This really, really empowers the talent, the skills that these 3rd house planets are representing, that he has these great, great talents. Remember, 3rd house and 5th house is all about great talent, abilities, skills, creativity. And he has, with the mind, astute skills in this field of golf. It's amazing. He was the best in the world for so long. We equate the name Tiger Woods with golf. He did a lot for the whole sport of golf. So the other planet, and to think about how his relationships were so difficult. Notice that Pluto in his 1st house is aspecting his Jupiter by opposition, and this can represent that he does not like to be controlled by others. This is one of his bottom line issues, because when he feels like he's being controlled, that is when he pushes away. And I think that might be one of his issues concerning relationships. The only planet I haven't discussed is the sun, and the sun is in the 4th house. And this represents in his home, in his family, his father was the controlling force. Because the sun is the father, it's in the 4th house. But traditionally, the 4th house represents mother, home, security, family. The sun there is a little harsh because in Vedic astrology, the sun is a malefic. It's too much energy where it is. So he probably didn't get to spend that much time at home. And notice, by its trinal aspect, Ketu is aspecting the sun. And this does put a damper on his security, his home, his family, his mother. There was definitely some issues in the home. But notice that in the 5th house we have Mercury, and in the 3rd house we have Venus. It's with the moon and Neptune, but Venus and Mercury are benefics, and they flank on both sides of the 4th house, which is called a Shubha-Katari yoga. We talked before about Roger Moore having the Papa-Katari yoga, which means hemmed in by malefics, but this Shubha-Katari yoga is hemmed in by benefics, Venus, Mercury. And therefore, this gives a good result from the home. Even though we see the sun, and the sun is aspected by Ketu, there are some problems in the home, but they're uplifted, and he was meant to find happiness through family and the home by the benefics surrounding. Remember that Shubha means good, Katari means scissors, so it's hemmed in by benefics. So this is a good result. So he will he is destined to find his happiness. So let me show you what happened. Going back to 2009, 2010, that was right around the time that he entered his moon Mahadasha. And remember, the moon Mahadasha, his moon is in the third house, his gifts, his talents, but it is debilitated. And it's Gandanta. So the moon has these issues, and aside from that, Mars is opposed his moon. So Mars is casting its rays and its light to the moon. Now this is actually called a Chandra Mangala Yoga. Whenever you have moon and Mars fully aspecting each other, that means they're either conjunct or opposed. And it always means great business sense and business success. Hey, he represented so many organizations. He had incredible endorsements. He had endorsements from General Motors, General Mills, American Express, Nike. At one point in his career, he was estimated to have about $600 million around the year of 2009. But then he had his great fall and he entered into the moon's Mahadasha, which is a 10-year cycle. Right before he went into the moon, this whole fiasco happened with his wife. And the moon being aspected by Mars, and remember Mars is 7th from the moon, this can represent our marriage partners. It fell apart. Mars aspecting the moon is very difficult for relationships. Plus Pluto aspecting his moon, his 7th house, in the natal chart is very difficult for relationships. So, right after, it was 2011 that he was in the moon Mars Mahadasha. Notice that Mars goes to the 7th house counting from the moon. That traditionally, when I read this in a chart, means divorce. It does. If people can make it through that, they can make it through anything. And now he is in moon Mercury that just started about 2 months ago. Right now being in the month of June, just started. And he will continue to be in this till September of this year, 2017. And if you will notice, Mercury, moon Mercury, look at the Mercury. The Mercury is aspected by Saturn. There are issues and problems about responsibility, getting it together. So the moon, Mars, that's what really triggered it off and started a downward cycle. And back around 2009, 2010, transiting Pluto was right on his sun. And that can represent problems and issues with his health. By the way, I published an article about Tiger Woods in 2009 and right before 2010, right after this fiasco. And I said his marriage would never reconcile and he was on a long-term downward spiral for a while and will not make it back for a very long time, based on this moon's Mahadasha. And if I might say, he will leave the moon's Mahadasha and he will go into Mars Mahadasha. This will be the year of 2020. So that's a good change for him. I believe that could change. But remember, Mars does rule the 8th house. So it is not going to be the best time of his life. There's a lot that's going on here. Really, his upswing cycle was before he went into the moon's Mahadasha, which was the sun's 6-year cycle. That was his best cycle. And if you will notice, the sun in the 4th house, of course, by being in the 4th, it is casting its rays and light to the 10th. But I believe the reason why the Sun's Mahadasha was the powerful good cycle that put him on the top was because the Sun is Papa Katari. Shubha Katari. We were looking at Roger Moore's chart before this, and his 4th house was Papa Katari, but in Tiger Woods, it's Shubha Katari, the Sun, the Dasha ruler, in the 4th house, surrounded by benefics, uplifted him and made his career very successful. But let me talk about the transiting planets. What happened now? What caused all of this turmoil? Because certainly back in 2009 and 10, transiting Saturn was in Virgo. It was in his 1st house. This was very difficult. And by that time, transiting Saturn, by being in Virgo, was aspecting his moon and his Venus by its 3rd full aspect, and aspecting Jupiter in the 7th house. So transiting Saturn, when his marriage broke up, was in the 1st house, casting its rays and light to the 7th house, aspecting Jupiter, which is the ruler of the 7th house, in the 7th house, his marriage partner. So it all fell apart by transiting Saturn. And over the last few years, we've had Saturn in the sign of Scorpio. So he's had a really rough time for the last 2.5 years. And essentially what cycle he is in is called Sati Sati. Sati Sati means 7.5 years. Why? Because Sati Sati is when transiting Saturn comes in the sign before, the sign of, and the sign after the natal moon in the chart. So Saturn stays in a sign for 2.5 years. That's why Sati Sati means 7.5. It goes for a 7.5 year duration. Now, I think that it is way overestimated, the Sati Sati. And I believe when Saturn comes into the sign of the moon, it is definitely more intense. And while Saturn has been in Scorpio, Tiger has had major health issues. He has had major problems. And I want to say that when Saturn goes back into Scorpio, the month of June of 2017 through October of 2017, that window of time is going to be hard on Tiger Woods because Saturn is almost exactly on his moon throughout this duration. So he's got some difficulty ahead. And I want you to pay attention to the transiting planets that I found that created this terrible disruption in his life just now. Because what happened is he's on so many prescription drugs for all of his ailments that he has had surgeries for because of the golf, that he has become dependent on these drugs. And these drugs he has been abusing, and he's lucky to be alive because he was found asleep in his car after he, fortunately, probably the 9th house protected him. Fortunately that he didn't hurt anyone and he was asleep in the car after the car was in an accident, his fenders, whatever. He is in a bad place right now. Why? At the time of the accident, Uranus was 2 degrees of Aries. And if you will notice, it is in his 8th house, transiting Uranus, that is. And note where his Mercury is. It is at 2 degrees of Capricorn. So I want you to pay attention to his natal Mercury to really get a sense of the transit's timing of the day of this accident, because Uranus was exactly squaring this, which is a hard, full-bodied aspect. And And if you will notice where transiting Mars is on the day of the accident, it was at 2 degrees of Gemini. Notice that Mars, in its full-bodied aspect, its 8th aspect from where it's transiting, is in 100% of power. This Mars special aspects are 4 and 8 from where it's located. It gives 100% power. So the transit of Mars was exactly aspecting his natal Mercury, ruler of his chart, in the 5th house. And the 5th house, by the way, is the house of the mind, our intelligence, our thinking capacity. And Mercury is the mind. So was he thinking logically? No. Furthermore, Uranus and Mars are known to be accidents. Mars is impulsiveness. It is when we do things in a hurry, rash judgment. Mars and this aspect, which is 8 placements from where his Mercury is, Mars. This is called the quincunx aspect. So it's 8 placements, and if you counted back from where Mercury is back to the transit of Mars, you would have 6. So it's 8-6, which is the most destructive aspect. So we have Uranus and Mars aspecting his Mercury in the 5th house, which Mercury is his chart ruler. Additionally, take a look at where transiting Saturn was on this day. Saturn was at 1 degree of Sagittarius, and it's backing up. It's soon to be 0 degrees of Sagittarius, which is exactly aspecting his ascendant degree, which is 0 degrees of Virgo, 50 some odd minutes. His ascendant is 0 degrees, 53 minutes of Virgo. So we have Saturn almost exactly aspecting by its 10th aspect, a square aspect to his ascendant degree. This is difficult. This is hard. This is setbacks. This is problems in his life. He feels heavy, the weight of the world, heavy responsibility when Saturn's aspecting the ascendant, especially exactly to the degree. But we know that in June of 2017, currently right now, Saturn is going to go back into Scorpio, and it will remain till about the 3rd week of October of 2017. So from June to October, Saturn's going to be in Scorpio, crossing over his moon. This is the Sati Sati. Remember, this is the most pungent, hardest time. This is that 7.5-year cycle where Saturn is in the sign before, the sign of, the sign after the moon. Sati Sati, he is under the stress of Saturn onto his natal moon. This is the mind. This can cause depression, and does. So thinking about the 7.5-year period of Sati Sati, I definitely think that it's the time that Saturn is in the sign of the moon. Whereas we know it's Saturn stays in a sign for 2.5 years. So the sign before, the sign of, the sign after the moon is that 7.5-year period of Sati Sati. But being in Scorpio is going to be the most intense. And Saturn is all about responsibility. It is about growing up, finding our way, being responsible for our karma, for our destiny. So here is where Tiger Woods stands with this period of Saturn going over his moon. This is very difficult. So I want the public to support and to pray for him and to pray for his guidance, because he does need it. But we all go through Sati Sati. I believe he's going to make it, and I think this could be where he can truly grow and expand and be aware of his mistakes. because that's what life's all about. We must learn through our mistakes. And I think that's the essence of what Saturn's all about. Because in the year of 2020, when he goes into Mars Mahadasha, this will be a whole different experience for him. A whole different experience. So Tiger Woods needs to make a comeback. He needs to wake up and get strong, and Saturn is the responsible force that could do that. So with that, I'd like to close. And if you would like to learn Vedic astrology, you can go to my university, which is University of Vedic Astrology.com. And if you would like a reading, you can always go to my website, which is galacticcenter.org. And if you would like to read more about Vedic astrology, I have a magazine, which is astrologicmagazine.com. Thank you.